Hey, what's going on guys, it's Sealzy and welcome back to a brand new video on the channel, and today we're talking about a new era of horror movies. And this era to me is best described as a renaissance. Now, to understand why I believe we're in a horror renaissance, we have to look at the actual definition of what renaissance means. Renaissance, a revival of or renewed interest in something. And I think this definition perfectly encapsulates the era we're in right now for horror movies. But to best understand my point, we gotta go back, way back, all the way to the 1920s through 40s, back when I didn't have rights. Now, I've seen a lot of conflicting things online whether or not the golden age is between the 20s and 30s or the 30s and 40s, but to be safe, I'll just say the golden age is from 1928 to 1946. And from this era, we got classics like Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, Wolfman, The Mystery of the Wax Museum, and The Invisible Man. And these are classics that have stood the test of time. People still make remakes of these movies to this day, and these movies came out almost 100 years from now. Now, even back then, horror was snubbed at the awards, but Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde did win an Oscar in 1931. But with this point, there's also a lot of discourse online about what the true golden age of horror is, and a lot of people say that the 70s and 80s were actually the golden age of horror. Now, I can agree with you on some point of that there were a lot of great horror movies at that time, but I wouldn't consider it the golden age of horror. There are tons of classics from this era like Alien, Friday the 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, and a lot more that I can't even mention right now as I keep going for like 2 minutes straight. And some movies at that time did win awards like Jaws and The Exorcist, but to me personally, these movies did not get the same respect that their older counterparts did. And that could be simply because the movies are older, and older movies just get more credit because film bros, and it's just, oh, it's a classic, it's what made the whole genre and movies itself, right? But overall, it is more respected. Do I agree with that? No, but I'm just going after what the most historians believe and what the most people believe, the most widely accepted opinion. And if you don't already know and can't tell in this video, horror movies very rarely get their flowers ever, and they're never really taken seriously by the movie industry ever. And that's going to be a very common trend, and I'll talk about that a little later in the video. But since you understand the golden age of horror movies, let's get into the dark age of horror movies. Now, my definition of the dark age of horror movies isn't set by any historians. There's no historian setting out a dark age for horror movies. It's just my personal opinion. I think a lot of other people agree with this. I think the dark age of horror movies is around 2000 to like 2014, 2016-ish, maybe 2017. And the reason I don't have an exact time frame is because some of the movies I'd consider a part of the Renaissance are around like 2015, 2016, 2017, but there's also still some dark age movies at that same time frame, so that's why it's not really exact. But this dark age of horror is characterized by torture porn because of the Saw franchise and Hostel. Torture porn was a huge part of that era because there was like 7 Saw movies and like 2 or 3 Hostel movies at that time. Found footage because of the explosion of the Blair Witch Project, and also Paranormal Activity. And that spawned the rise of a lot of copycats trying to capture the same fame that the Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity received. And then you have the multiple horror remakes of Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, just you can literally see all of the remakes happening in the early 2000s. It's actually really funny. And then last but not least, the Blumhouse shit cans. Now, what is Blumhouse? Blumhouse is a production company that specialized in low budget horror movies. And a lot of the horror movies they produced were pretty much full on shit cans. They were not that good. They were pretty bad. That's what they're known for. And they pretty much permeated this whole era of horror movies, and I would say it's the most defining feature of it. And look, this dark age of horror movies isn't all bad. I'm a 2006 baby, so I kind of have a soft spot for these movies. I love the Saw movies. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. The Insidious movies are good. Purge is good. A lot of the Paranormal Activity movies are good, and the past 3 movies I just listed are Blumhouse production movies, so I guess it's just not all complete shit cans. But some other movies from this era are also pretty good, like the 70s and 80s horror remakes like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween. Now look, these movies are not critically good. I wouldn't recommend you go watch these movies, but these are my first introductions to these characters as a little kid. My first time ever seeing Jason on screen was like the remake of Friday the 13th. My first time seeing Leatherface was a Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. So to me, even though they're not that good, They have a special place in my heart. I grew up with them. And last but not least, this era gave us the Sinister movies, and it gave us the great James Wan. Now, even with all these great things I listed, I still believe that this is one of the worst times for horror. I believe it had some of the least respect it's ever had, ever. People really just saw horror as a cheap thing that you would just go watch to get some scares, but that's it. It just wasn't really respected overall in the movie community. It just wasn't at all. But then we started getting the kindling of a horror renaissance in the mid to late 2010s, with movies like It Follows, The Witch, Hereditary, Get Out, Midsommar, The Lighthouse, Us, and a lot more that I can't mention right now because I don't even remember because there's just so many that started popping up. But that kindling went to a raging fire from pandemic to now. And as the cool kids say, elevated horror became the new big guy on the block, and it's the figurehead of what I think the renaissance of horror movies is and what the modern horror movie is today. Since I can't really inform you what elevated horror is with my own words, let's just read the AI overview of what it is. Elevated horror is a term used within the Hollywood industry to describe horror films that are more sophisticated, thematically rich, and often explore psychological or social issues, distinguishing them from traditional slasher or creature features. And some of the powerhouses involved in this horror renaissance is A24 and Neon as the big major producing companies, and some of the major directors being Jordan Peele, Robert Eggers, Ari Aster, and Zach Cregger. And there are some directors I am missing, but these are the main four I would say that are leading the way to this horror renaissance, and Neon and A24 are some of the major producing companies leading to this revolution and renaissance of horror movies. And some of the major horror movies coming from 2020 to 2025 that I can list off the top of my head are Nope by Jordan Peele, X and Pearl by Ty West, Infinity Pool by David Cronenberg, Smile 1 and 2 by Parker Finn, Talk to Me by Danny and Michael Filippo, Longlegs by Osgood Perkins, and last but certainly not least, Barbarian by Zach Cregger. Now, if any of you are familiar with these movies, you'd realize that all the movies I listed are before the year 2025. So you might be asking, are there no good horror movies this year in 2025? Is the renaissance over? And I would say absolutely not. As to me, this is the best horror movie year we've had in a long time. I don't want to say ever, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but honestly, to me, I would say this is the best horror movie year we've had ever. Now, I'm not saying, oh, the scariest movies of all time, like I mentioned in my last video, how that's super annoying when people start saying movies are just the scariest, but we have gotten some great movies like Nosferatu from Robert Eggers, Bring Her Back by the Filippo brothers, Companion by Drew Hancock, Together by Michael Shanks, the big movie currently, Weapons by Zach Cregger, and the other big movie earlier this year, Sinners by Ryan Coogler. And the last three movies I mentioned, if they don't win some type of award at the Oscars, I'm going to fucking riot. Nosferatu should also definitely win an award, probably for cinematography because it had some of the best camera work I've seen all year. I mean, that carriage scene, just chef's kiss. I mean, this year so far, we have 3 to 4 horror movies that should definitely win some sort of award at the Oscars this year. To be safe, I would say 3, if these 3 don't win an award, people will get upset. But to me, man, Sinners, Weapons, Together, and Nosferatu should all win some type of award at the Oscars. They just should for me. Like, I would be upset. I'm not just talking out of my ass. Like, people like these movies. They have good reviews. They have good audience reviews and critic reviews. So I'm not just talking nonsense here. These are good movies, like critically, objectively good movies. Maybe not objectively, but you get what I mean. They're very critically well loved and received, and people like them. They should win something, dude. I'm just so tired of horror getting snubbed, but back on topic. These are 4 movies that should definitely win awards. They're well received, they're well loved, and these are just the movies that I consider Oscar worthy. There are still a lot of other great horror movies that have come out this year, and there's just no other word that fits the horror age that we're in right now. Renaissance, because we are so fucking back, baby. I actually totally forgot that Nosferatu is not a 2025 movie. It came out in 2024. I feel like a complete dumbass, but it's just the way it is. It's currently 2:05 in the morning. I'm trying to edit this video, and I realized that Nosferatu indeed did come out in 2024. So rip me, I guess. Hope you enjoyed. Peace.